All right, guys. Welcome back to the Lost Boyz Podcast, episode... I forgot what episode it is. Is it 14 or 15?
I thought it was 13.
No, we did 13.
Welcome back to Lost Boyz Podcast, episode something.
I think it's 14. Episode 14. Yeah. The number one podcast on Mars, Milky Way Galaxy. If you don't like that, then come find us. It's not a secret.
Argue about it with your mom.
With that being said, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you can get notified every time we post, which is every Thursday at 12 p.m.
Be there, be square.
Comment, follow the TikTok page, Lost Boyz Podcast. Make sure to like, comment on that as well. Share it. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
If you want to follow us on our personal socials, I'm guessing, is it in the description? Or the bio?
Yeah. It's in the description of every single video.
Yeah, there you go. You'll find it there.
It literally says Gianni's IG, Brandon's IG. Can't miss it. Unless you're Stevie Wonder. Nah.
But with that being said, today's topic, we're going to be talking about perspectives. The different perspectives, the importance of perspectives, and whatever comes up from that. We're just going to run with it and see what happens. But yeah.
Real quick, just on the topic of perspectives, I think this is actually a conversation I was having earlier that I didn't even put this on the notes for the episode, but it just came to mind. I was having a conversation with Jeremy, one half of the Weeping Weaves podcast, like 2 episodes ago. Check that out, I think, or 3. Who the fuck knows?
Yeah, something like that.
We're just talking about like some progress, right? You look at whatever goals you're chasing, and I realized that I had this perspective of, work, but I have no metric of what I'm using to measure my success. So my perspective is that, I'm making no progress, when in fact I'm just not using a ruler to measure the progress. And when he said that, I was like, wait a damn minute there. Like that's fire to think about, because there's a lot of people who feel lost or feel like they're not taking any steps forward or anything like that. But in reality, you just don't know what it is you should be looking for as a signal for your success.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can apply to a lot of things in life. Just like happiness too, right? Like if you're measuring all the bad things in life, then you're going to only know the bad things. Mm-hmm. But if you measure like just the most little things possible, like, the bus came 5 minutes early today. Oh, yes.
That's a win.
Yeah. And you start counting your wins instead, then everything changes. Your whole perspective on life and your mood, everything starts changing. So I think that's actually really good to have a metric system to measure what it is you're trying to go for. And then try to like have bigger, I guess, rulers, and then the small rulers, I guess. I don't know. But I like that. I really like that.
This was not on the agenda for this conversation. This just literally popped in my head as soon as we started talking.
Yeah, no. That's a dope thing to have, though. I don't even know how to word it, but like that's a good way to think about it and go about it. Like have something to measure what it is you're trying to achieve. That way you could count your wins. Mm-hmm. Count the wins too. Make sure you count the wins, because that's what's gonna keep that discipline going.
Oh yeah, dude. Like you said, the bus came 5 minutes early, I went to Starbucks today and there was no line in the drive-thru. I was like, this is a fucking W. I was in and out because if you're in this area,
something as little as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you were saying, in this area.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're in this area, for the few people who are watching this who are in fact in this area, and the Starbucks by the gym is a fucking pain in the ass. And when I flew through there, I was like, nobody can fuck with me today. You know how quick I got this Starbucks?
Yeah. But no, I think that is really... Shout out to my man Charlie Rocket for putting this perspective in my mind, where it's like, count your win streak. So every time you win, tell yourself, okay, I'm on a winning streak. And I'll figure out how can I keep the winning streak going. Like, okay, the bus came 5 minutes early. Cool, I'm on a winning streak. All right, I'm looking for my next win now. What's my next win? I got to work early because of it. Winning streak. I got 2 wins on the day now. I wanted ice cream for lunch. I got ice cream. Winning streak. 3 wins now on my day. And you just keep going and keep looking for the winning streaks. And then every day as you keep looking for those winning streaks, what you're subconsciously doing is finding the good and as much as you can, which in return is going to bring good back into you.
It's
And I think it comes down to a perspective. Depends how you look at it, because there's also a lot of negative things that happen. But if you choose to focus on the negative, then you don't have the good. If you choose to focus on the good, then you couldn't ignore the negatives.
Dude, think about it. Our brains can only search for what we're telling it to search for. It's why, like, the common example of this is, I say I want a Mercedes, right? All of a sudden, on every corner of every street ever, you only see Mercedes now.
Yeah.
It's because you're telling yourself oh shit, like, Mercedes is important now. So now you're spotting all the Mercedes that were always there. You just weren't thinking about them.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't a priority to you, but now that they're in your head, now your brain is spotting them. It's the same way with wins, and wins to me are like the metaphor for like opportunities too. Because the more you start thinking and looking for opportunities, you start realizing, oh wait, this is an opportunity for X, Y, and Z. For example, shout out to Julian when he watches this. I just saw his story, and he built a relationship with a videographer at the gym, and it was all through a conversation. And he was saying in his post where it's like, a conversation led to like an opportunity and everything like that. But that doesn't happen if you don't look for it, if you don't put yourself out there for it.
Exactly. You gotta go and get it or ask for it in that case. But yeah, interesting, because it all comes down to perspective, right? It's how you look at it. Even just asking somebody, you can look at it as like, oh, that's embarrassing to ask. Or you could look at it as like, fuck it. What do I have to lose?
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, in my personal opinion, I think the person who goes up to it, like, what do I have to lose, probably gets further.
Absolutely.
Because you're not afraid, and you never know what could happen. Like, you never know who you meet, what kind of advice they give you, or how willing to help they are and stuff. But yeah, it comes down to a perspective. Like, okay, I could do this or I could do that. But then it also brings up the question, which we could get into a little deeper in a bit, but like, okay, is that perspective correct? Or is this one correct? Or any of them correct? Which I think brings up a whole new topic. But before we dive into that, I do have a question.
Sure, let's go.
So what is a good or bad perspective that you have, or that you think you have?
I'll start with...
Like that you think is good or bad is what I meant to say.
I'll start with the bad, right? My perspective is that even though it works in my life and understanding the world, it may not apply for everybody. I have this perspective where I believe evil and bad are necessary in the day-to-day life. Not that you have to be a bad person or that you have to do evil things, but like you have to understand how much they exist in the world. Mm-hmm. So like that, you don't go insane when you see the news.
Yeah.
That's why everybody says like, oh man, I had to stop watching the news because it was like taking a toll on my mental health or something like that. I look at the world where I'm very aware that these negatives exist. It just keeps me way more sane. But on the flip side of that, I would say my good perspective is that anything that happens, I believe we're meant to get through. Like, for example, let's say I lose my job, right? Then that means I am in a situation where I am supposed to learn from this. I'm supposed to gather my data and make the changes necessary to better myself just a little for the next situation. And to me, that's all life is, because look at like even like parents or just people just trying to get to the next step and learning. So for me, I think all the bad situations, and there are some fucked up things that happen in life, I think they're really just the diamond in the rough. Like, you're supposed to find the lesson in everything to improve yourself. Interesting.
So with your so-called bad perspective, I actually agree with it too. I personally think you can't have good without evil. Like, the evil is what sets the tone for wanting to be good, in my opinion. And I don't know. If you want, we could dive into that.
Sure.
If not, like, I don't know. I just think, like, when you think of it that way, right? And somebody could think the completely opposite if that's their perspective, right? Who's to say one's right, one's wrong? But I think if everyone is just good, then life just stops. Like, cool. Like there becomes no meaning to being good anymore. But if you have evil, then it creates meaning to being good. Like, it's very easy to be a bad person, but to be a good person, you actually have to work for it.
Yeah.
Like, you actually have to try to be a good person. Like, it's not as easy as people may think. Maybe it's easier for them because they were raised a good way and they had parents who showed them how to be a certain way. But also not everybody has that. Otherwise, evil wouldn't exist. But I think it's human nature to be evil. It's not human nature to be good. I think you have to work to learn how to become good and become good at, like, just overall a good person and become good at being a good person.
See, I know I've heard you guys say before, like, oh, you guys always talk about, like, our biology and that we don't live in a time like that. I'll shut the fuck up, right?
Biology is biology. Though.
Exactly. I think, look at nature, right? If we can all agree that killing is an evil act, then all of nature is evil.
100%. We're still evil. We still kill animals, each other, everything.
Even
plants.
Especially plants. Like, if you just look at the animal kingdom, it's this animal eats this animal that eats that animal. But it's all this evil that creates a beautiful ecosystem. The world depends on this evil. We depend on certain animals eating other animals and maintaining the populations, which ultimately, like, for example, let's say the lions eating the gazelles, right? Well, guess what? The lions are going to eat the gazelles, and the gazelles are going to eat, I don't know what the fuck gazelles eat. Let's say they eat, like, plants, right? Yeah. Well, guess what? Lions are eating the perfect amount of gazelle that are eating the perfect amount of plants. So like that, where there's not too many plants, not enough plants, and there's just enough plants for all the bees everywhere. Like, everything,
it's
like,
all connected. It all plays into one big
at one big cycle.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think I should have wrote it down. I should have fucking wrote it down. But what was I gonna say? Oh, it comes down to, like, you could even argue it being evil perspective as well. Like, some people may see that as being like the fact that evil needs to exist. Well, then what do you define as evil? And then is that definition of evil relative to you as an individual or not? So, like, maybe somebody who commits murder can be viewed as evil. But what if they committed murder because somebody else was trying to kill them? Well, then are they still evil? Because if you consider murder to be evil, well, then that makes the person evil. But are they evil if they were just defending themselves? So then that comes into play too, where there's different perspectives to it. So, like, I feel like you can't classify one thing as one specific, like, no, this is it and it has to be this way. I think it could be one way and somebody else could see it another way, and both can be right and both can be wrong. Because just because I don't agree with it doesn't make you an evil person. Because I may think if it's self-defense is cool, but you may think anyone who commits murder is evil. But then if somebody tries to kill you and you kill them, well, then you're evil. But you may not see it that way. Then your perspective changes. Like, it all comes down to how you decide to look at it.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Exactly what you said is, like, for example, we live in an area where self-defense in the court of law is basically a myth.
Yeah.
And then there's places down south where there's, like, castle doctrine, right? Where it's like, defend your property, cool. Defending yourself, nah, you still took a life. So there's two schools of thought. Shout out to my philosophy classes in college. Majority of modern religions are based on natural law, while there's also an opposing school of thought, like the consequentialist, where it's like, well, what is the consequence of the action? So, for example, you said you killed somebody to save your own life, right? Well, guess what? It's justified because of the consequence of the action. You needed to save your own life. while natural law says any form of taking a life is evil.
Jack, so it comes down to perspective. Which do you believe? Like, you can argue, I can argue that it's not evil, and you could argue that it is. At the end of the day, if you really think about it, neither one of us is right nor wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to our personal perspective, and it's all individual. But again, yeah, the perspective is just like, okay, there needs to be good and there needs to be evil, but then what do you classify as evil and what do you classify as good?
And where do you draw the line?
See, because you could also think somebody's good because they do charity work, but then if you look at the books, 90% of that money going to the charities actually going to their pocket. So then, are they good people still? 10% of it is still benefiting those that charity. So that charity is still making money. Those whatever it is, the charity's for still getting the money. So are they evil for keeping 90% of the money and only giving 10, or are they good people for only giving 10 and keeping 90 when they could have just given 0?
At the end of the day, they still gave.
It comes down to the perspective of it, like which is right, which is wrong.
Mm-hmm. And depending, and there's so many variables to this. See, perspective is one of those things that go into like free will, because free will is like, you can do as you please. You have the option to choose right or wrong, right?
Yeah.
Now, your perspective, you can choose your perspective. You don't choose the perspective you were given while growing up, but you choose the perspective you keep. You have to open yourself to growth.
I don't actually, see, we could go back and forth on this. I don't know if you don't choose the perspective. I think your perspective is influenced when you grow up. But I think, or at least maybe I'm speaking for myself, my perspective is influenced. But at the end of the day, I still made the choice to have a certain perspective where there's certain things I see one way and others don't. And there's another way where people see it some way and I don't see it that way. But my parents' influence on me played a big role into my perspectives and why I saw certain things a certain way, I would say. But at the end of the day, I still made the conscious choice to like, I'm going to choose this over this.
See, the reason why I disagree with that is not so much in the long term, like at our age or anything like that. But I think between the ages, you're growing up, you're 6, 7, 8 years old. Like you're in your, what I call like your downloading phase. You're just grabbing information. This is where we'll see kids like repeating things their parents are saying, right? So they grow up for a brief period of time with a certain perspective. And let's say going into high school, right? The perspective you have going into high school, I would say, is the perspective given from your parents. Now, the perspective you leave high school with, and I'm using high school as an example, right? Just because I don't have the number for the exact age range when we start like, oh, wait, this is wrong, or right? But the perspective you leave high school with is like, all right, this is what I was taught. This is what other people were taught. This is what I'm being taught at the moment too. What makes sense to me? Bam. Because some people mature really young. Some people mature at fucking 30.
Yeah.
Like, I see perspective as like a plate of food, right? You're given this plate of food. It is what it is, right? Let's say it's mashed potatoes and asparagus, right? That's what we just ate. But you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is good, but, I don't really want it. So then you start cooking up some other things. You start seeing, oh, well, what are other people, like, putting on their mashed potatoes? And oh, garlic, bam, bam, bam. You start throwing more things in there, and now you have a totally different dish. I see what you were saying on, like you chose to have that, because at the end of the day, you did choose to improve it. But my question to you, after a very long-winded example, is where do you draw the line between thought given to you and when you make the choice to have these perspectives?
like the influence versus the
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I think it happens right away. Like if you take a teenager, for example, in high school, and then you ask them, and then you take their parent, right? The parent has a perspective, and is trying to influence their child to behave and take certain actions based off their life experience when
Mhm.
they were going through that same thing, similar age range, and they were going through that time where they were in their teens, and they're trying to make it relative to what they went through in their thought processes and things they did, and then reflecting back on it. Whereas that child in that teen years may hear or maybe if they're the parents are lucky enough, they'll listen
Mm-hmm.
to what the parent has to say, and it'll influence certain actions. But I think the perspective of the teen that's very common too, is like, you're just an old man or you're an old woman, you don't know what you're
Mhm.
talking about. Like, it's different now. Like, it's not whatever year it was when you were a teen. And then as you get older, you start, or at least for me, as you get older, you start to realize, no, what they were saying was right the whole time. I just
Mhm.
thought I knew better than them, but I didn't. I actually didn't know nothing. So I think, like, when you take that, the perspective, they eventually, like, in order for that to happen, they have to make the conscious choice to change that perspective, right? But if you take their teen years, they still have a certain perspective that no matter what influence or how they were told to be, they can still be rebellious and
Mhm.
things like that. Where it's very common for like teenagers to be rebellious and not listen to their parents or think their parents that don't know what they're talking about and stuff like that. So it's like, then you have some kids who do listen. So I think it's not so much that these people saw it any different than these. I think it comes down to the parents had a little bit more influence on these
Mhm.
versus the others. But at the end of the day, both children made the choice to have that certain perspective and act those certain ways.
See, so you said something there where it's like with the first child about consciously making the change. While yes, the change is the most important part, I think there's a step before that where it's like you have to be willing to question everything first. Like, you have to be willing to ask questions about, all right, we don't like apples. Well, why don't we like apples? Like, what's so bad about apples? Oh, X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that makes sense. We don't like apples. Or X, Y, and Z. See, I don't know. That really doesn't make sense to me. Tries apple. Oh, shit, apples are actually mad fucking good, right? Like, I feel like that has to be there's a step before that, and whatever period of time in life this is for everybody, where I think you should be questioning perspectives and ideologies and everything given to you, because that's the cornerstone of like your own self, like having your own belief system, understanding.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think you should question other ideologies and perspectives. That way you can understand them, and who knows, maybe it changes your perspective. But I think when it comes to like children growing up, I think the parents have a very heavy influence,
Mm-hmm.
but they can still have different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to say that all of them aren't like all kids growing up, their perspectives aren't because of their parents, but it's to say that not all of them will obtain the same perspective as their parents. Some may actually choose the other route or choose a different perspective, where like you can have a child who grows up and let's say they're gay, but their parents think, no, you can't be gay. Well, here are two different perspectives, and although they're trying to influence the child that you can't be gay, the child is not going to change what their natural biology is telling them to be gay. So then you have two different perspectives, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, yeah.
And it could be like maybe the general populace is the way you're saying, but what I was just saying is like there can be some that think one way and not the other, and there can be some who think one way because of the other.
Agreed. Like, and I think like trying, the distinguishing factor there with the example you gave is not trying to see the other perspective. I think if you can evolve a skill of being willing to see the other perspective or opening your mind to the other perspective, like you said, like for example, let's say the parent and the child had a conversation. Like, all right, well, why do you feel this way? Or X, Y, and Z. Like, well, were you born like this? Were you not? Whatever, X, Y, and Z. Whatever the conversation is, right? I think that's the deciding factor in reaching that middle ground. Because ultimately, that's where in anything, whether it's politics or any form of debating, should be the goal.
Yeah.
Is if we're gonna have a conversation, let's reach a middle ground to where we can see each other's points and maybe you change my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's the key though, where people go into it with that mindset where you have to be open-minded about it. And that's the thing. In my personal belief, I believe the majority of the population is very closed-minded. Even the ones that claim to be open-minded. There are certain topics that you can bring up to them and they will become closed-minded about it. So there's many people who I think are open-minded to an extent. And I think it's very important to challenge other people's perspectives, but not to confuse it with attacking it.
Yes.
It's one thing to challenge it and another to attack it. Because if you're challenging it, you're trying to understand more on a deeper level why someone believes the things they believe and why they see it that way. And then maybe apply it to yourself and see if that works for you or it doesn't. Versus if you're attacking somebody, well, then you're not trying to understand them. You're just trying to prove a point to yourself. Like, what you're trying to do by attacking them is just trying to disqualify them so you can satisfy yourself and be like, see, I was right. That's all you're trying to do. You're just going to keep trying to pick something out to prove that just for the sake of winning the argument, not for sake of getting anywhere or coming to an understanding based off a discussion you had. And I think that's the key where people go very wrong, where they attack instead of, I think they have confused attacking versus challenging. It's one thing to attack, another to challenge. Like, you shouldn't attack somebody's way of thinking. You should challenge their way of thinking. And there's a very big difference in the two.
A simple example is, how could you say that versus, well, why do you say that?
Exactly.
Like,
or why are labeling somebody for believing something? Oh, you're misogynistic for thinking that way. Instead of, well, why do you think that way? What influenced you to start thinking that way? Why do you think this, and that? And then you start to understand first. Then you can say, okay, well, here's where I see it coming from. And you let me know then I can start asking you questions. Well, why do you see it that way? And then we can both come to an agreement where we may not agree, but we at least have the understanding for the opposing side. And it's like, okay, we came to a middle ground. We can agree to disagree at this point, but at least we have an understanding of each other versus I'm just like, oh, he thinks that women shouldn't show nothing besides their eyeballs, and the other person thinks women should show everything except for their nipples. And it's like, well, then who the fuck is right? Who the fuck is wrong? Why do you think that way? Why do you think that way? You have to communicate and try to understand why one thinks the one way and why one thinks the other. Otherwise, you get what we have today. More separation. What you get is more extremism and extremism. And then you have what goes on today where somebody says something and the other side doesn't agree with it. And instead of asking, why do you think that way? Instead, they just go, cancel him, cancel her. Shouldn't have a platform, shouldn't have a chance to grow anymore, shouldn't succeed in life, shouldn't have nothing, just cancel him. And that's basically what everybody's doing. Even if you're not on an influential level where like your words mean anything to the mass majority of people, you're still embodying those characteristics.
It's true.
Instead of just being curious, not to be cynical, but so you can be educated more. You know? But with that being said, I have questions about your good perspectives. How like you think we go through things for reasons. So my question is, do you think that it's because we go through something for a reason? Or do you think that when you go through it, you're exposed to those things? And so by telling yourself we went through it for a reason is more of a coping mechanism where it makes you digest it easier and better? versus having to say like, oh, I need to work on this, where it's a little more harsh on you.
Sure. So I would say it is definitely a coping mechanism, because a coping mechanism that works for me. Because I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody's in an abusive relationship. You know, they getting their ass beat, right? They leave the relationship, but they don't take any lessons from that. Or they don't choose to like dissect why this was happening. They're gonna end up in another abusive relationship, and so on and so forth, right? Until they start breaking down the minutia of it and start realizing, oh, well, X, Y, and Z happened. I should probably avoid X, Y, and Z, as opposed to the person who's like, damn, like that shit sucked. Why was this happening? Like, what did I do? X, Y, and Z, and start dissecting the situation. It's like, all right, X, Y, and Z were definitely red flags, right? They are going to go into their next, say, relationship with open eyes. Now they can see, oh, I saw that before. That's bad. Mm-hmm. Like, if you've burned your hand before and you see the let's say skillet, you're going to know not to put your hand on it because you know it's hot. But if you don't learn the lesson and you're going to keep thinking like, oh, well, maybe this time it won't be hot. Motherfucking 9 out of 10 times already that you burned yourself, it's going to be hot on the 10th one too.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say it's a coping mechanism, just because you can't predict what life has in store. But the only thing you can predict is that life has something in store.
Yeah.
No matter what, nobody's living a smooth sailing life.
Yeah. I personally don't think you go into life or go into situations looking for a lesson. You just come out with the lesson. But you have to be self-aware enough to be able to look and try to want and understand why certain things happen. Like, you need to be able to question it. And I think that makes it very important to have, like, people around you that you can question. Like, I think it's very important to have like-minded people, right? Like, if you're all on one goal, like, okay, we want to achieve this level, and you have those kind of people around you, is very important to help get you there. But you also have to have people that can have that same mindset, but also go against some of the things you believe in, where they can challenge you again. Whereas, like, okay, you think this, but I think it's this way. And we have the same goal. So you think it's this way to get to that goal. I think it's this way to get to that goal. We have the same goal in mind, and we're both working for the same thing. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that way is better? And why? And then you ask me, why do I think my way is better? And then we start to figure it out. And then soon, before we know it, we either agree to disagree and we do what works best for us, or we come to an understanding, or better yet, we both end up seeing two different perspectives and understand it enough where we know how to use it to our benefit, where instead of taking a slow train up, we take a bullet train up now. And it comes down to having the right people around you too. Like,
agreed.
You got to also be around people that are willing to have the conversations, because not everybody's going to be so open-minded about it. And like I said, the majority of people are closed-minded.
Have to be willing to disagree.
Yeah.
I was going to say, an example of that is the group we have, right? We all have the same goal, but crypto, real estate, fucking businesses, as opposed to X, Y, and Z. Like, there's so many different realms of getting to a definition of success, all different routes, all of them very valid in their ability to work, all of them very different. And all of us can explain why our route is the best.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they all work. When in reality, the power of having like-minded individuals with differences, because you can be like-minded, we can have the same thought processes and disagree on everything, but we see the arguments the same way. But back to what I was saying, the power of that is, well, guess what? If you can remove your emotion from everything, from like that argument, you can say, oh, snap. Well, my way works. What can I learn from his way? So now I have 2 routes and 3 routes and 4 routes, or 4 ways of seeing something versus just the one concrete way that you originally had.
Exactly. I think that's super important for one, growth in general, and two, just to be overall be educated. Because now when you have discussions and you understand opposing sides and you don't agree with them, because you understand them, it can make your argument stronger to prove your point furthermore. Again, perspectives are just opinions. It doesn't make one right or the other. Again, maybe that's just me, but I do have a question, a little bit different, I think, but we'll see. My question to you is, do you think people should fight for what they prefer individually versus a general concept? For example, like if you take a Muslim wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
The concept in the U.S. is like, because a U.S. wife and a Muslim wife, like a Muslim meaning like they're true to their traditions and values, and a U.S. wife meaning like how we know modern wives to be today.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously operate very differently. Two completely, I shouldn't say completely, but they have different ways of going about their values,
mm-hmm.
right? The Muslim wife is making a choice to stay home, be with the kids, take care of the family, doesn't go around her husband's friends and things like that. Whereas the I guess to put it, the U.S. wife, right? I don't know how else to put it, but the U.S.
Western.
the modern traditional wife, modernly today, is like she can go out with a girls' night out. She can go hang out around her husband's guy friends. She doesn't have to only take care of the kids. She can do other things and things like that. And there's no way of saying, okay, this one's right, this one's wrong. But then if you ask people, they'll say, like if you ask them about the Muslim way,
mm-hmm.
like a U.S. woman who grows up and gets married like that, and you ask her about how Muslim women live that way, in their eyes, the Muslim women are oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
They're being held back. It's unfair. They're not treated properly. But then if you ask the Muslim woman, they're very happy.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them want to be that way. Some of them like to live that way. And they look at the U.S. woman as a disgrace.
Mm-hmm.
So then who's right, who's wrong? It comes down to that. So my question is, do you think people should fight for what they prefer individually versus a general concept? Because the general concept is just what the majority thinks. But just because the majority thinks, it doesn't make it right either.
Mm-hmm. So, that's a really good question. I sum that up as individuality versus greater good.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much.
So, personally, I would say it also goes back to what you're going to measure as the success of whatever the choice is. So I would say if it's something like in legislation, right? There are decisions that would make the day-to-day life way better. But on the whole, for a country, it's like, that's not the best, right? So, for example, let's say, I'll use guns as an example off the top of my head, where you can have, all right, it is probably beneficial for me to have a gun, but is it beneficial for the entire country to have a gun? Probably not, right? Because you have some fucking psychopaths in some corners of some random fucking state, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, with that said, do you have to pay attention to the potential negatives, or is it about just the good? That's what I would sum this question down to, because...
And I would say it depends. It comes down to perspective, because with what was the example you gave before the guns?
What's best for me versus best for the country.
Yeah. So like, again, perspective. If it's good for me, then it's good. If it's good for the country, then it's good. But if it's bad for me, good for the country, then it's bad. If it's bad for the country, good for me, then it's good. Like there's no way of saying one's right, one's wrong. It's like you have a Democrat or Republican. One has this belief, one has these certain beliefs. What makes this person such a bad person and you're not? And what makes you, this person, such a bad person and this person's not? It has to come down. The only way you meet at the middle ground is if you both accept that some of you are, you both embody some good and some bad.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is one thinks one's better than the other, and so does the other party. So then who's right, who's wrong? It all comes down to perspective. I could be Republican, let's say, and you're Democrat. You think I'm a piece of shit person. You didn't even know me. Just because of my political party or my political viewpoints, you think I'm a terrible fucking person. I'm a shitty piece of shit human. I don't deserve shit in this world. I don't deserve success. I deserve to live at the bottom of the barrel. And I may think, because you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, you're a piece of shit person and you deserve to live at the bottom of the... Who the fuck's right? Who the fuck's wrong then? There's no middle ground. You know what I'm saying? And then I think it ties into my next question, where it's like, if you choose to have everybody live under one consensus, then is that morally correct? I don't think it's morally correct, because I don't think it's correct for everybody to live in a certain way because of my perspective, because my perspective may not be right, or not. It may not be true to you.
It may not be good on the grander scale.
Exactly. That's why it's like, you look at different cultures. Different cultures exist for a reason, because they have different perspectives. They think, no, living this way is the right way. Whereas here we think, no, living this way is the right way. Well, then who's right, who's wrong? Are they bad or are we bad? Are they good or are we good? It comes down to your personal opinion. So then why even get emotional over political debates? No. See it for what it is. Understand there may be some good here. There may be some good here. There may be some bad here. There also may be some bad here. Where do I meet in the middle? And I'm going to go from there. And apply that to anything and everything in life. Not just politics, but just everything. Religion, relationships, anything. Anything you could think of, you just apply that to. And that's probably where you start to live more at peace. Whereas like now you have like somebody who's Republican and a Democrat will literally get into an argument to the point where they want to physically harm each other. Over what? Over your perspective?
Like,
think about it. Like, it comes down to that point. Like, and then one wants the mass to live that certain way, and the other one wants the other mass to live that certain way. But then is that even morally correct? Because who am I to tell you how to live? And who are you to tell me how to live?
Especially, no one's anyone to tell anybody else how to live.
Exactly.
Right? First and foremost. But it's also, when you look at the minutia of like Western Hemisphere values versus East values, right? Because the two have very different metrics for measuring value. For example, I'm going to go back to the women, right? For the women, it's about, scarcity. Only the husband, right? And the family. While in the Western society, it's more about contribution is value, right? So on one end, we see, all right, this is also my understanding of it, because who knows, somebody could roast me in the comment section and I'll be like, oh shit, this person's right. Somebody could try and roast me and I could be like, shut the fuck up, and I could shit on them.
Or somebody can enhance your point too.
Exactly, right? Which I'm totally open for. Please comment down below if you agree or disagree with anything we said. But anyways, back to what I was saying. In the Eastern society, you have scarcity as value, and in the West, we have contribution as value. Well, what do you bring? For example, that's why the whole motion is, like the independent woman motion, right? like the air quote high value woman is she goes out, she makes her own money, right? While the East see that as very disgraceful because you're taking away from the value of being the mother of the children. So these core values or the metrics of measuring these values go so deep to where it's like, well, you can't even disprove either one if you wanted to.
Exactly. It comes down to preference, and who's to say what you prefer is wrong? Who's to say which is right? And there's many extremes you can take it to, but like, if I prefer that my woman stays at home, raises the kids, doesn't work, none of that, right? But you prefer that you do work, raise the kids, and all that. Well, then you prefer that, I prefer this. Why am I a bad person? Mm-hmm. Why are you a good person? One side of the world sees you as the bad person, the other side sees you as the bad person. So who the fuck is right, who the fuck is wrong? It comes down to what you prefer. And just meeting people who meet those preferences, and you can understand each other and meet a common ground and take it from there. But again, it just comes down to like your perspective. And then the mistake I think many people make is labeling others for their perspective or for their preferences. Whereas like, you're no better. Who's to say your way of thinking is how everyone should live? If 10 people think you're a bad person and 10 people here think I'm a bad person, well then we're both fucking bad people. So then what the fuck? Like, we get nowhere at that point.
Yep.
But instead you start labeling people. I don't fucking know. What's a word I could think of?
Misogynistic.
You could say misogynistic for thinking that, or for preferring that his wife stays home, raises the kids, doesn't work. Maybe. But then I also think you're a misandrist for thinking like men aren't shit because you make more than a man now, or things like that, right? Yeah. So it could go both ways. It could also go into other different like labels too, like I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head now.
Racist. If you
that one's a little tricky though.
No, because look, hear me out, dude. 2020, when the whole George Floyd thing happened, right? If you didn't post a square on your Instagram profile, you were fucking racist.
Sure.
What if I just wasn't on fucking Instagram that day? And now you get a DM, oh, I noticed you didn't post it. That's disgusting. How could you not support X, Y, and Z? Motherfucker, I wasn't even on my phone that day, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be careful of emotion in handling differences of perspective.
Exactly. It all comes down to just wanting to understand why, for the betterment of your knowledge, and not to be cynical. Because I could be a cynic about it too. Like, you could be like, oh, well, I think women shouldn't work. And I could be like, why? And then you tell me why, and then I keep going, why? Okay, but why? Okay, but why? 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 Now you're just being cynic. Now you're just saying it for sake of just being an asshole at that point. You're not really trying to learn or get anywhere. Whereas you could ask, why? And then just try to listen to it. And then be like, well, look, here's why I think this, though. And then you tell me why you may disagree or agree. And then we could go from there, where it's more like an understanding for knowledge, not so much to be cynical either. Because then people will take it to the extreme too, especially if you're arguing with somebody for your knowledge, but they're taking it emotionally and they don't have any other rebuttal other than why? Then you know, okay, well, here's why. And you get up and you walk away. But again, I think it just comes down to understanding that humans are going to be humans. And obviously we're all not the same. Our bodies are not the same for the most part. Our skin color isn't all the same. Our language isn't all the same. The food we eat isn't all the same. Our culture isn't all the same. So clearly we all have different perspectives and ways of thinking of how one should live and how life should go, how one should come into life, how one should leave life, things of all of that. So who's to say one's right or wrong? So stop labelizing and trying to, quote unquote, cancel people or quiet them or hush them for believing a certain way they believe. Instead, you should just understand why they think the way they do, come to a conclusion whether it works for you or it doesn't. If it doesn't work for you, cool, do your thing. I'm here in my lane though. If it works for you, cool, I'll make the left turn and start going down this lane now. And that's it. There's no need to attack though.
Yeah.
But people attack because of that. Like, my life experience and his life experience could be completely different. So why do I have to attack him for now thinking a certain way, right? Like, if you grew up in the hood and all you saw all day, every day was people selling drugs and robbing people, well then, am I really a bad person for thinking that that's the way of life and that's how you grow up? And if I'm lucky, I make it at 25 and that's my life? No, because that's just how I grew up. I became the product of my environment. And if I grew up filthy rich, and I think if you didn't invest in Bitcoin, it's 2014, you're an idiot. Well, then that also doesn't make that perspective correct either, because like they just don't make sense. You become the product of your environment. So if I'm exposed to one way of life and one certain lifestyle, and I grow up thinking certain things because of it, doesn't make me wrong. Maybe I don't have the life experiences that you have, but that doesn't necessarily make my perspective incorrect either. Could there be things I could improve on? Sure. But at the end of the day, you can't say somebody is something because of that.
See, what you just said is so fucking true. Like, what you're exposed to enough rubs off on you. It's what you become. But it also goes back to questioning and making sure you understand what it is that you believe in. Because take that same person who only saw like drug dealing and killing and shit like that, right? You still have the ability to question what you're seeing to try and take a different route, or try to see the perspective of the kid who's raised in the billionaire family and invested in Bitcoin in whatever year, right? The power of questioning your perspective and questioning other people's perspective opens the lane for, it might not be a wide lane, it might not be that grand, but it's still an opportunity to not go down that same path.
Exactly.
But it, like we said earlier, it all goes back to being able to question or being willing to question.
Yeah. Again, just taking it back to that example, right? You take somebody from the suburbs and you put them in an environment where people grow up in the hood, they're going to look at it like, what the fuck? Why are they doing these things? Like, I don't get it. Because they don't understand the perspective. Their life experiences didn't get them to that point.
Yep.
Whereas these people are looking at the kids in the suburbs like, the fuck? Like, what are they doing? Because they don't get it either, because they didn't have those life experiences either. So to them, they both have completely different out views on life because of that. But who's to say one's right and one's wrong? If this is all I know and I know no better, how could I be wrong for not knowing that I should have done this instead? No one ever told me otherwise. So am I a bad person for it? Or was I just misinformed? Again, perspectives. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's very interesting talking about perspectives. I think the key takeaway from just this podcast in general is just to try to understand why people think the way they think. Not to be a cynic, but to really educate yourself. And don't assume or attack based off something that triggers you emotionally or whatever. No. Let them explain themselves. Hear it. But don't only hear it, listen to it too. Don't hear to argue. Listen to understand and comprehend. Formulate a thought, an opinion. And then you respond. And then that's how you get somewhere. Because who knows? You may end up changing their mind. They may end up changing your mind. Or you both just may agree to disagree. But at least you have an understanding of why you come from this point. I come from this point. And I can at least understand why you believe the things you believe. Whereas if you don't do that and you just attack, you don't get anywhere, and you're no better than the person you're attacking. For whatever reason you're calling them, you're also something else for doing those exact things, you know? So you're not any better, and you can't be any worse if you just try to understand each other and agree to disagree. But if you just attack, well, then you're just as bad as the person you're attacking.
You may not be exactly what you're attacking them for, but you're still being closed-minded. You're still
exactly
wrong under somebody else's lens.
You don't have to understand to apply and make that you become your life. You just understand so you can have the knowledge of, again, why they think the way they think. It doesn't necessarily, it may not apply to you and your beliefs, but at least understand where they're coming from and say, okay, look, I see where you're coming from. I personally don't agree with it. You know, this is how I like to live my life. This is what I think life should be about. And I'm going to stick with this, but I understand why you think the way you think. And you're allowed to think however you want to think. Who am I to tell you otherwise? And that's it, really. Comes down to perspective. But just be open-minded. Don't assume or attack. Ask questions, not to be a cynic, but to hear, most importantly, listen, and more than anything, comprehend. That way you can get somewhere and get further in life and grow and open up your mind.
How valuable it is to have, like, different perspectives.
Yeah, very important, very important. Especially people that come from different life experiences too. Because they're going to teach you things and you're going to teach them things. You're going to disagree on some things as well, but that's part of life. If everybody thought the same way, there would just be one whole country. Or maybe there wouldn't be a country at all, it'd just be Earth.
Yeah.
That's it. One species, one nationality, one language.
No innovation.
One culture. Exactly. All of that stuff. So it's good to understand opposing sides and take it from there. Again, perspectives, episode, I think this was 14, maybe 15, not sure.
Something like that.
We'll find out when we post it.
Episode perspectives.
Yeah, there you go. Episode perspectives. But yeah, I mean, I've got nothing left to say. So you got anything left to say that you might want to touch on?
We pretty much touched on everything I had down on my paper.
Sounds good. Well, yeah. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you could turn on the post notifications. We post every Thursday at 12 p.m. Comment down what you've agreed on or disagreed with in this podcast and explain why too. I'd love to hear your perspective on certain things that we talked about. And we'll go from there. Also, TikTok, make sure to follow. We'll be posting clips on that. And then our socials are also in the description.
Final words, real quick. What is a perspective or belief that you have that you don't think other people will agree with? Comment down below. Let us know. Because you never know. You might find some like-minded individuals.
Or you may find people who disagree and we can have a discussion.
Oh, that's the best scenario. Yeah,
but either way, do that. Comment down below. Even if you already tell us in person, just comment it too, because that may someone else may see it in the comment and then want to respond to that as well.
Agreed.
Except for instead of just telling us two in person. But yeah, with that being said, Lost Boyz Podcast, episode Perspectives. Peace out.